He was the strongest man who ever lived. Stronger than any army, stronger than any beast. Strong enough, the old stories say, to hold up the weight of the sky itself. And yet, he spent the best years of his life as a servant, bowing to the commands of a weak and frightened king, sent out, again and again, on errands designed to kill him. Why would the mightiest man on earth ever obey? Why would a son of Zeus himself submit to 12 impossible tasks, each one a death sentence dressed as a chore? The answer is not glory. The answer is something far darker, a single terrible night that he would spend the rest of his life trying to undo. This is the story of how the strongest man in the world became the most haunted, and how, against all the laws of gods and men, a mortal finally earned a place among the immortals. But to understand his punishment, we must go back to, before he was ever born, to a jealous queen and a lie whispered in the golden halls of Olympus. It began, as so many tragedies do, with the wandering eye of Zeus. The king of the gods looked down upon the mortal world and fell in love with Alcmene, a princess of rare beauty and virtue. From their union, a son was conceived, a child who was half god and half mortal, carrying the blood of Olympus in his veins. Zeus was overjoyed. He boasted among the gods that a descendant of his own line was about to be born, one who would rule over all those around him. But every word he spoke was heard by another, by his wife, by Hera, queen of the gods. And Hera did not forget, and she did not forgive, for she was not by her nature a cruel goddess. She was the guardian of marriage and of the sacred vow, and every child of Zeus born to a mortal woman was, to her, a living insult carved into the order of the world. Heracles had done nothing. He had not yet even been born, and already he was her enemy simply for existing. Hera's jealousy was a slow and patient thing, older than mercy. On the day the child was due to be born, Zeus swore a great oath that a descendant of his blood, born that day, would become a high king. Hera saw her chance. She went to the goddess childbirth and laid Alcmene's labor, while hurrying the birth of another child of Zeus's distant line, a weak and sickly infant named Eurystheus. And so, by a trick of timing, the crown that Zeus had promised to his mighty son passed instead to a frail and fearful cousin. Before the hero had even drawn his first breath, his destiny had been stolen, and the small, cowardly king who now wore his crown would one day become his master. When at last the boy was born, they gave him a name heavy with irony. They called him Heracles, which means the glory of Hera. Perhaps they hoped the name would soften the goddess's rage. It did not. While Heracles was still an infant, no bigger than a loaf of bread in his cradle, Hera sent 2 great serpents slithering through the palace in the dark of night to end him. But when his nurse came in the morning, she found the child laughing, a strangled serpent crushed in each tiny fist. Even in the cradle, the strength of the gods was already in him. The nurse's scream brought the whole household running, and they stood in silence, staring at the impossible sight. An infant playing contentedly with the bodies of 2 dead serpents as though they were nothing but toys. And already the hatred of a goddess was hunting him. Heracles grew into a young man unlike any the world had seen. He was taught to wrestle and to ride, to shoot the bow and to fight, and in every contest he was without equal. But his strength carried a shadow within it. For once, as the boy, when his music tutor struck him in anger, Heracles struck back without thinking and killed the man with a single blow. It was an accident, a flash of temper in a body far too powerful for the world around it. but it was a warning of what he could become. His strength was a gift. It was also, when his mind slipped from his control, the most dangerous thing in all of Greece. And Hera knew it. For a time, though, it seemed that happiness might find him, after all. Heracles grew famous for his deeds, and in reward he was given the hand of Megara, a princess of the city of Thebes. He loved her, and together they had children, and for a while the strongest man in the world knew something he had never known before: a quiet home, a family, peace. But peace, for those whom Hera hated, was never anything more than the stillness before the storm. The goddess had been waiting a long time, and now, at the very moment his guard was down, she prepared to take from him the one thing his strength could never protect. Hera sent down upon him a madness, a blind and burning frenzy that stole his reason and left only rage. In that darkness, Heracles no longer saw his wife and his children. He saw enemies, monsters, threats to be destroyed, and with the same unstoppable hands that had crushed serpents in the cradle, he turned upon his own family. When the madness at last lifted, and his mind returned to him, he stood in the ruins of everything he loved, and he understood what he had done. No enemy had ever wounded him. No beast had ever brought him low. But in a single night the goddess had made him the instrument of his own destruction. And now the strongest man in the world wanted only to die. For days he would speak to no one. He covered his face and fled from the sight of other men, unable to bear their eyes upon him. Death would have been a mercy, but even that was denied him. Somehow, impossibly, he would have to find a way to go on living. He could not undo it. But the ancient world believed that even the darkest guilt could, through suffering, be cleansed. So Heracles traveled to Delphi, to the sacred oracle, and begged to know how he could ever be purified of such a crime. The answer he received would shape the rest of his life. He was to go to Tiryns, and there submit himself to the very man who had stolen his crown, his cowardly cousin, King Eurystheus. For 12 years he would serve, and whatever labors the king devised for him, however impossible, however deadly, he would perform them all. Only then, through obedience and through suffering, might his guilt be washed away. It was a strange kind of justice, that the price of a single moment of madness should be 12 years of the impossible. But the ancient world believed that suffering, freely accepted, had a power all its own, the power to make a broken soul clean again. And so we have our answer. The strongest man on earth bowed to the weakest, not from fear, but from grief. His labors were never about glory. They were penance. The king, small and fearful, saw in these labors a chance to be rid of his terrifying cousin forever. He would not face the hero himself. He had neither the courage nor the strength for that. Instead, he would send him against the most monstrous and unnatural creatures in all the world, one after another, and let the beasts do what no man could. And for a long while, it must have seemed to the trembling king that surely, this time, his cousin would not come back. So he began with a monster that no weapon could harm. In the hills of Nemea lived a lion whose golden hide was impervious to bronze and iron. Arrows bounced from it. Blades snapped upon it. Heracles hunted the beast into its cave, and when his arrows failed him, he cast his weapons aside and faced it with his bare hands. In the darkness of that den, hero and lion fought, until at last Heracles wrapped his arms around the creature and strangled the life from it. The roars that echoed from the mouth of the cave were said to have driven the shepherds from those hills for miles around. And when at last There was silence. No one dared approach, until the hero himself stepped out into the daylight, unharmed, the great golden beast draped across his shoulders. Then he skinned the beast using its own razor claws, the only thing sharp enough to cut it. And from that day, he wore its impenetrable hide as a cloak, its head as a helm. When he returned carrying the lion, King Eurystheus was so terrified that he hid inside a great bronze jar and forbade the hero from ever again entering the city gates. The second labor was worse. In the swamps of Lerna dwelt the Hydra, a serpent with many heads and breath like poison, and a horror that made it almost impossible to kill. For each time a head was struck off, 2 more grew back in its place. The more Heracles fought, the stronger the monster became. The stench of its breath alone was enough to sicken a grown man, and its dark blood burned the grass to ash wherever it fell. It seemed a battle that could never be won. But he was not alone. His nephew Iolaus had come with him, and together they found the answer. As Heracles severed each head, Iolaus pressed a burning torch to the wound, sealing it with fire so that nothing could grow back. One by one the heads fell and were burned away until only the last remained. An immortal head that could not die. This one Heracles buried beneath an enormous stone. And then he did something that seemed clever at the time, but that would one day return to end his own life. He dipped the tips of his arrows in the Hydra's black venom, making them deadly beyond any weapon on earth. Remember those arrows. They are not finished with this story. From there the labors came without mercy, one after another, each stranger than the last. He was sent to capture the golden-antlered hind of Artemis, a sacred deer swifter than an arrow, and he pursued it gently for a full year rather than harm a creature beloved of a goddess. He was sent into the snows of Mount Erymanthus to bring back a monstrous boar alive. And when he carried it home upon his shoulders, the king once more dived trembling into his bronze jar. He was ordered to clean the stables of King Augeas, where 3,000 cattle had left filth uncleared for 30 years, an insult meant to humiliate him. But Heracles simply tore open the walls and turned the course of 2 great rivers, letting the rushing water wash the whole of it clean in a single day. Still the tasks came. He drove away the Stymphalian birds, a flock of creatures with feathers of sharp bronze, startling them into the air with a great rattle forged by Athena herself, then bringing them down with his arrows. He crossed the sea to Crete and wrestled into submission a raging bull that breathed fire and trampled the island. He tamed the man-eating mares of the Thracian king Diomedes, horses so savage they fed on human flesh. He mastered them in the end by a method as grim as the beasts themselves, and led them home tamed. Yet twice the king refused to count a labor as truly done, once because a companion had helped him, and once because he had accepted a payment for the work. And so the 10 tasks became 12, and the hero's servitude stretched on. And each time he returned alive, the cowardly king grew more desperate, and the labors grew stranger and more distant, sending the hero to the very edges of the known world. He was sent to the land of the Amazons, the fierce warrior women, to take the war belt of their queen Hippolyta. The queen, admiring his courage, agreed to give it freely, but Hera, ever watchful, spread a rumor among the Amazons that Heracles had come to steal their queen, and turned a peaceful meeting into a battle. And so, through no fault of his own, the hero was forced to fight the very people who had welcomed him, and the queen who had offered him her gift freely was lost in the fighting. It was Hera's cruelty in its purest form to poison even his kindest victories. he was sent far to the west, beyond the setting sun, to steal the cattle of Geryon, a monstrous giant with 3 bodies joined at the waist, whom he brought down at the very rim of the world. With each labor, Heracles walked further from the world of men and deeper into the realm of the impossible. And the king was running out of monsters. So he devised the 2 cruelest tasks of all. For the 11th labor, Heracles was sent to fetch the golden apples of the Hesperides, a treasure hidden at the world's end, in a garden guarded by a dragon that never slept, in a place no mortal even knew how to find. After a long and wandering search, the hero came upon the Titan Atlas, who was condemned to stand forever at the edge of the earth, holding the entire weight of the heavens upon his shoulders. Atlas alone knew the way to the garden, and so Heracles struck a bargain. He would take the burden of the sky upon his own back, if Atlas would fetch the golden apples for him. The Titan agreed gladly and set off. For a time, the strongest man in the world stood in the place of a god, bearing the crushing weight of the entire sky. And when Atlas returned with the apples, he had no wish to take his terrible burden back. But Heracles, who had learned cunning as well as strength, asked the Titan only to hold the sky a moment while he cushioned his shoulders, and the instant Atlas took the weight again, Heracles picked up the apples and walked away. The Titan, who had borne the heavens for an entire age, had been outwitted by a mortal in a single afternoon, and returned groaning to his endless burden beneath the stars. And then came the last labor, the one the king was certain no man could survive. Heracles was to descend into the underworld itself, into the kingdom of the dead, and bring back its guardian, Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed hound that stood watch at the gates so that no soul might ever escape. To enter the land of the dead and return was a thing almost no mortal had ever done. But Heracles went down into the darkness, past the rivers of the dead, and came at last before Hades, the silent king of the underworld. The dead parted before him like mist, and the cold of that sunless place pressed in on him from every side. Even the ancient ferryman of souls, the stories say, carried a living man across the black water only because he did not dare refuse him. And Hades, respecting his courage, gave him a single grim condition. He could take the great hound, if he could subdue it with his bare hands, using no weapons at all. So Heracles seized the beast by its 3 snarling throats, and wrestled it into submission, and carried it up into the light of the living world. When Eurystheus saw the hound of hell standing in his courtyard, he understood at last that there was no task on earth or beneath it that could defeat this man. The labors were over. Heracles was free. 12 impossible deeds, 12 years of suffering, and through them, at last, his terrible guilt was washed away. But the story of Heracles does not end with his freedom, because the past he thought he had buried had one final blow to strike. Years later, the hero took a new wife, Deianira, and while traveling, they came to a wide river. A centaur named Nessus offered to carry Deianira across, but in the middle of the water he tried to steal her away. From the far bank, Heracles raised his bow and loosed a single arrow. And that arrow, remember, had been dipped long ago in the black venom of the Hydra. As the centaur lay dying, he took his revenge with a whispered lie. He told Deianira to save some of his blood, telling her it was a love charm that would keep her husband faithful forever. She believed him. She did not know the blood was soaked with the same deadly poison. Long after, when Deianira feared she was losing her husband's love, she remembered the centaur's words. She took a fine robe and soaked it in the blood she had saved and sent it to Heracles as a gift. He put it on, and the Hydra's venom, hidden in the centaur's blood, began to burn into his flesh, a poison against which even the strongest man on earth had no defense. It was agony beyond anything the labors had ever brought him. He had faced lions and hydras, and the very hound of hell without a single cry, but this pain drove even him to his knees. He tore at the robe until his own flesh came away with it, and still it would not release him. He could not tear the robe away. It clung to him and consumed him. And so the man who had strangled lions and held up the sky was brought low at last, not by any monster, but by the venom of a beast he had killed a lifetime before. The clever trick of his second labor had circled back across all the years to claim him. Knowing that no cure could save him, Heracles chose the manner of his own end. He climbed to the top of Mount Oeta, built a great pyre of wood, laid himself upon it, and asked to be set alight. As the flames rose around him, something extraordinary happened. The mortal part of him, the part inherited from his mother, burned away in the fire. But the divine part, the blood of Zeus that had always run within him, could not be touched by any flame. And as his suffering finally ended, that immortal spark rose up from the pyre, up past the clouds, up to the golden halls of Olympus itself. There, at the last, even Hera's ancient anger was spent. The queen who had hunted him from his cradle made her peace with him. And Heracles, the mortal who had endured more than any man should ever bear, took his place among the gods. And so we return, at the end, to the question we began with. Why did the strongest man in the world spend his life in service and in suffering? And how did a mortal come to sit among the immortals? The answer, hidden in every one of his 12 labors, is this. It was never his strength that made him a god. Strength strangled the lion, and cleaned the stables and carried the sky, but strength alone had also killed his family and cursed his life. What lifted Heracles to Olympus was not the power in his hands. It was what he endured, the guilt he carried, the penance he accepted, the pain he bore without ever laying down his burden. The Greeks understood something profound in this story, that greatness is not measured by how much we can lift, but by how much we can suffer and still go on. The lion's hide and the golden apples faded into legend, but the endurance of Heracles became immortal. Long after the temples fell silent, his very name became the word we still reach for, to describe a task almost beyond human power, a Herculean effort. 3,000 years later, we are still measuring our own struggles against the labors of a grieving man who simply refused to give up. Rest now, and when you are ready, we will sail on to a war that gathered every hero of the age beneath the walls of a single doomed city.